Welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Phil Arno. There's an old saying that the only things certain in this life are death and taxes. Well, I'll bet more than a few of you out there have thought about how to avoid the tax man, but in the history of mankind, I can't think of anybody who's ever successfully cheated the Grim Reaper. Although the supreme irony might be popping out on the other side and finding in heaven a member of the Cuomo family with his hand out collecting taxes, maybe for an orientation fund for people who got there illegally. That would be nasty. Anyway, this show is not about taxes, it's about the other subject. Well, not exactly about death, what happens after death, the afterlife. I know it's not exactly the most cheerful subject, not my idea of a fun date, standing there in a bar talking about the spirit world. Although my guest on today's Big Picture might disagree. Karyn Reece talks to dead people all the time. The $64,000 question, do they talk back? If you can figure that out, well, don't tell the tax man. Welcome to The Big Picture today. The always lovely, always charming, sometimes scary, Karyn Reece.
I love your intro. And you know, you're being psychic because I used to be a stockbroker, so I know somewhat about taxes. Talk about full circle.
Well, that might be a great way to attract people in, tell them what the stock market's going to do tomorrow.
Google, never mind.
Well, on a serious note, people who hear that you're a psychic, or psychics in general, they fall into two categories. People who believe, enthusiastically believe that there's communications with people who've passed on, and people who want to believe but really can't get themselves to sign on. You know, people who say, I'd like to believe, but you know what, either there's nothing there, or if there is something there, we really can't, we can't reach out and touch that. What do you say to people who can't quite believe?
Make that leap. Well, I always tell people it's not my place to try to convince you. However, I tell people, think about it this way. 100 years ago, if you told somebody you'd be able to talk to somebody through a piece of hardware on a live, a phone, a conversation, and through wavelengths, that they would be able to communicate back and forth, we never would have believed it. And that's what the afterlife, it's a different type of frequency. So if you can envision that when you leave your physical, you look like yourself, maybe a little more pastier, but you're in that frequency. Like a radio wave. You can't see it, but you know it exists because you've got, one box and another box making the communication. Sometimes it works, other times it doesn't. And I just tell people, it's okay to have a little bit of healthy skepticism. We all do. But, unless you actually have an experience, sometimes you just can't make believers out of it. Unless, of course, they're on their deathbed. Then people believe.
It seems that the more educated people become, the more we understand about the world through science and breakthroughs and progress. The more people demand an explanation that is hard evidence, and so if they, you can explain radio and television where, like you say, 100 years ago, that was like voodoo. I mean, you just, it would have never been believed. Today, we know more and more and more about what was unbelievable back then, and people become more skeptical because there's so much more knowledge. But who among us hasn't had an experience of deja vu? Mm-hmm. Or, you're thinking about somebody and 5 minutes later the phone rings and they say, hey, I just, I had to give you a call. And suddenly I was thinking about you, and you have that experience and you really can't explain it.
That gut instinct, which is your first baseline of psychic abilities. So everybody does, to some extent, have that. I find it fascinating because you have a lot of physicians now coming out where they've done surgeries or somebody's died, then they bring them back and somebody will say, well, I saw that, you put a pencil on top of a shelf, or, somebody came in and left the room, but they had checkers on underneath their gowns, and how would people know that, So if you're unconscious or, you've had a near death, and yet these people are reporting things that they wouldn't know, but because they left their body for a brief period during some sort of a near-death experience, they've been able to, tell their physicians. And other naughty little secrets to their physicians too, like your mother came around and that had passed on and told me this, that. So I find that kind of interesting because you do get some of that from the medical establishment now.
Well, for people who really need, kind of a little proof or verification that there might be something there. When I was in college, I took a course and we talked about ESP and past life experiences and various parapsychology. And one of the things that we studied was during the Cold War, the governments got involved with experiments, and they actually set up divisions where they basically had psychics working behind the scenes to try and figure out what was going on in the Soviet Union, and they did experiments, and I don't know how far it went, and it was all classified, but the government was actually doing experiments with parapsychology.
Oh yeah, the STAR program, remote viewing is what they were doing, and Bill Clinton had that. I wasn't sure, I think under him, I think he cut half of it or closed it down, but yeah, there's a lot of that type of, thing going on with the government. Even to this day, they do have like little, they won't tell you that, just like UFOs, they won't get into that.
Well, and that was the origin of LSD. Some of the experiments with mind-altering drugs. They wanted to explore what the human mind was capable of.
Oh, it's like the Philadelphia experiment where the government went ahead and made some sort of manipulation with energies, and some of the people came out with, went into some sort of like dead zone, and then they came out at the other end, and all sorts of crazy things came about that have been hushed supposedly, but people are able to extract some information.
Now, in your experiences, how long ago did you first find out or realize that you had this ability to delve into what was considered to be the other side, or an unusual conversation, if you will, with people who aren't here?
Well, I've always had this ability. I can remember it too, probably my earliest experiences when a woman by the name of Margaret would visit me from the other side, who was a guide, and would show me my past life in jolly old England, which was interesting. It was probably around the 40s, right after World War II. And then just growing up, my mom would say remarks, oh, I saw 3 monks today that were dead, or Uncle Frank, who was deceased, would talk to her. So, I just thought it was normal. We would go shopping. I would see like maybe a wife and a husband who's in spirit following her. But it wasn't until the age of 7 that I became really aware that this wasn't something that everybody did. Knowing, something ahead of time was going to happen, or seeing dead people. But I predicted my dad's death, and about 3 weeks later, he dropped dead suddenly, unexpectedly, of a stroke. So it was kind of interesting. I'd wake up with this vision, I'd go to bed, and thank God my grandmother was also very tuned in, said it was just God's way of preparing you.
Now, these experiences aren't, it's not like, you're sitting in your easy chair watching a big screen TV. It's a lot more hard to explain, isn't it? It's not a concrete vision that you're having, it's more of a feeling. How do you explain it?
Well, there's different ways that you can perceive when it comes to psychic or mediumship. Psychic's the ability to see past, present, and future. Mediumship is obviously communicating with all dead. All mediums are psychics, not all psychics are mediums. And for me, I'll see like a television screen. Like when the towers were dropping, I saw that happen in high school, and then 3 days before, I had an omen. I had a Mothman, which is like a giant fly type of human type of thing, come to me while I was meditating, and I could see him. Just as I can see you, as clear as day and night. But then I started seeing TV screens drop, and then I saw Tower 1 and then Tower 2 and how they were being hit. So for me, I'm a visual type of psychic. I see first and then I hear. And then when it comes to people on the other side, I can see people. Sometimes, though, I feel like I need to put my glasses on. So they look very human-like, but my vision is very fuzzy when I see. Sometimes it's clear because it takes a lot of energy for people on the other side to connect with you and vice versa. So for psychic, television screens, and then I'll hear things like watching a movie or seeing like little pictures. And then when it comes to the other side, and yes, they do bother me at night. Like, can't you do the bloody dishes if you're here? Save me So I'll be sitting there or driving, and I'm like, oh, somebody by the name of, Bill's in the back, you'll be meeting my mom later, and lo and behold,
Well, this is a fascinating subject. We're going to be coming back and talking a little bit about some of my experiences. We're going to talk a little bit more about what people want to know. You know, everybody out there wants to know that there's something there, you know, for people that you know that have passed on. It's kind of reassuring to know that it's not the end, that they're still there or that they're okay. Anyway, we'll get into that subject when we come back.